The first snowfall. The first flakes tiptoed down, barely audible against the glass before gathering into a thick, swirling veil. Silas, frozen mid-task at the kitchen sink, potato half-skinned in his grip, wished this year would simply vanish. Every year since Martha, really, each descending crystal was a miniature, frigid jolt to his core. He could almost conjure her bright voice. Silas, snowfall, cider, and gingerbread time. A memory that warmed him like a crackling fire against the encroaching chill. The potato plopped softly into the water, the metallic echo seeming far too loud in the silent house. Even the grandfather clock's measured tick in the hall felt like a funereal drumbeat, each second an eternity stretched thin. Outside, the landscape was undergoing a metamorphosis. The gnarled arms of the apple tree, typically etched against a bleak sky, now sported sleeves of intricate frost. The familiar scenery softened, blurred, as if retreating from his notice. Memories surfaced. Martha, swaddled in that monstrous, self-knit sweater, a riot of greens and browns that somehow suited her, attacking the snowdrift to the barn with a shovel that dwarfed her. He'd watch from here, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, a smile playing on his lips as she invariably flashed him a cheeky grin, her cheeks rosy, fine snow dusting her lashes. Then, the hearth would blaze, painting the walls with dancing light. Pine, from their shared Christmas tree ritual, would mingle with the tantalizing mystery of whatever Martha conjured up. Perhaps venison stew, slow-simmered to perfection, or her legendary apple pie, the crust a burnished masterpiece. He could practically taste the cinnamon and nutmeg, the molten filling that demanded immediate, painful consumption. Now, the hearth slumbered. The pine had turned to dust. The sole scent in the air, the faint tang of forgotten potato. He turned from the window, its beauty offering no solace. A sharp ache resonated in his chest, the familiar companion since her departure. Less a grief, more a yawning emptiness where her vivacity, her warmth, had once resided. He shuffled toward the living room, the soft scuff of his slippers barely disturbing the stillness. The room felt cavernous, arranged exactly as Martha had preferred, as if expecting her return to her usual armchair by the fire. Her knitting basket sat sentinel beside it, the half-finished scarf a vibrant eruption of color in the muted space. Untouched since. He lowered himself into his own chair, the worn cushions offering scant comfort. He clicked on the television, the shifting light a pointless distraction. A family beamed around a tree, their faces radiant with holiday glee. He switched it off. The oppressive silence returned. He considered supper, a meal he'd largely abandoned, subsisting on toast or soup. His appetite had dwindled, the simple joy of food having faded with Martha. She'd always reveled in it, creating feasts that fostered connection. Food is love, Silas, she declared. It feeds more than just our bellies. He closed his eyes, picturing her in her domain, her hands precise, her brow furrowed in concentration. The phantom aroma of her pot roast wafted through his memory, the meat yielding at the merest touch. His favorite. Now, the prospect of even the simplest meal felt insurmountable. He lacked the energy, the inclination, the heart. He opened his eyes, his gaze sweeping the room. The snow fell harder now, obliterating the world in a white expanse. He was alone, utterly, and winter was just taking hold. He rose, his joints protesting, and returned to the kitchen. He retrieved the neglected potato and the peeler, his movements deliberate. He would peel it, boil it, mash it with butter and milk. It wouldn't be Martha's pot roast, but it would be sustenance. As he peeled, he stared out at the swirling tempest. He wondered how he would navigate the winter, how he would weather the long, desolate nights without her light. He had no answer, but he knew he must try. For Martha, he owed her that much. He owed her everything. An ad in the Gazette. The ink in Silas's pen felt thick and resistant as he wrote, each word a small act of defiance against the silence that had settled in his house. Cook wanted, he wrote, the words stark against the crisp white paper. Winter months. Room and board provided. Apply Gazette Box 27. He chewed on the end of the pen, adding a final, hesitant sentence. Experience with traditional New England fare preferred. He folded the paper carefully, creasing it along sharp lines, as if to contain the hope and the dread it represented. He hadn't placed an advertisement in the Gazette in, well, ever. Martha had always handled such things, her neat script filling out forms for church suppers and town festivals. Now, even this small task felt monumental. The Gazette office was a cramped space above the hardware store, smelling faintly of newsprint and wood shavings. A woman with tired eyes and ink-stained fingers took his advertisement without a word, barely glancing at him. Silas paid the fee, the coins feeling heavy in his palm, and left, the bell above the door tinkling a lonely farewell. Back home, the silence seemed louder, amplified by the knowledge that he had taken a step, however small, toward changing it. He stoked the fire, the crackling flames a meager substitute for conversation. He found himself staring out the window, watching the snow fall, each flake a tiny reminder of the beauty Martha had found in the world, a beauty he now struggled to see. The next morning, Silas walked to Hemlock's general store for supplies. The snow crunched under his boots, the air biting at his cheeks. Hemlock's was the heart of the town, a place where news traveled faster than the wind. Silas usually enjoyed the camaraderie, the familiar faces and easy banter, but today he felt exposed, vulnerable. Old man Hemlock, a wiry figure with eyes as sharp as tacks, was perched behind the counter, reading the Gazette. He peered over his spectacles as Silas entered. "Mornin', Silas," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Nippy one." "Morning, Hemlock," Silas replied, trying to sound nonchalant. He picked up a loaf of bread, turning it over in his hands as if inspecting it for flaws. Hemlock lowered the newspaper, a sly glint in his eye. "Say, Silas," he began, drawing out the syllables. "Seen something interesting in the Gazette this morning." Silas's stomach clenched. He busied himself examining a jar of pickles, anything to avoid Hemlock's gaze. "Oh," he mumbled. "Yep," Hemlock continued, his voice dripping with curiosity. "Says here someone's looking for a cook. Winter months. Room and board provided. Sounds mighty accommodating." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Gazette Box 27, it says. Now, who do you reckon that could be?" The other men in the store, gathered around the pot-belly stove, fell silent, their eyes turning to Silas. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks. "Just thought I'd try something different," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. "The winter months are long." Hemlock chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Long indeed, especially for a bachelor." He winked. "Guess Martha's recipes are getting a rest this year." Silas didn't reply. He paid for his bread, the coins clinking on the counter, and hurried out of the store, the weight of their gazes heavy on his back. Back at the house, he sat by the window, watching the snow continue to fall. He imagined Martha, bustling about the kitchen, her laughter filling the air. He closed his eyes, trying to conjure her presence, but all he could hear was the silence, punctuated by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The first letter arrived 3 days later. It was postmarked from a town a few hours away, the handwriting neat and precise. Silas held it in his hand for a long moment, hesitant to open it. What if it was from someone unsuitable? Someone who wouldn't understand the quiet rhythms of his life, the unspoken grief that still clung to the walls of his home? He finally tore open the envelope, his fingers trembling. He unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the words, searching for a glimmer of hope, a spark of connection in the carefully chosen phrases. The woman wrote of her love for cooking, for the comfort of hearty meals on cold winter nights. She spoke of her grandmother's recipes, passed down through generations, recipes that echoed Martha's own. Silas read the letter again and again, each time finding something new to cling to. Maybe, just maybe, this winter wouldn't be so bleak after all. But a familiar unease lingered, a whisper of doubt that threatened to extinguish the fragile flame of hope. The letter was signed simply Eliza, Willow's arrival. The wagon rattled to a stop in front of Silas's house, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. Silas, who had been watching from the parlor window for the better part of an hour, straightened his tie, a nervous habit Martha had always teased him about. He hadn't expected her until midday, and the early arrival threw him off balance. He opened the door as a young woman hopped down from the driver's seat. She was smaller than he'd imagined from her letter, barely reaching his shoulder. A thick braid the color of autumn leaves hung down her back, and her eyes, wide and a startling shade of green, took in the house with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. She wore a simple woolen dress, its hem slightly dusty from the road. "Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "Silas," he corrected gently, offering a small smile. "And you must be Miss Greenleaf. Or should I say Eliza?" A faint blush rose on her cheeks. "Willow, please. And yes, I go by Willow now." She gestured towards the wagon. "My belongings are in the back." Silas nodded, stepping aside to allow her passage. "Let me help you with those." He retrieved a sturdy-looking trunk and a smaller carpet bag, surprised by their weight. He carried them into the hallway, the scent of lavender clinging to the carpet bag. "Thank you," Willow said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood awkwardly in the hallway, her gaze fixed on the patterned wallpaper. Silas cleared his throat. Come in. Let's get you settled. Would you like some tea?" "That would be lovely, thank you." He led her into the parlor, the room still holding the faint scent of Martha's perfume. Willow ran a finger lightly over the embroidered cushion on the armchair, her eyes lingering on the photographs on the mantelpiece. While Silas busied himself with the kettle, he studied her. She seemed young, barely more than a girl, but there was a quiet strength in her posture. He hoped he hadn't made a mistake. He poured the tea, adding a generous spoonful of sugar to hers, remembering Martha's fondness for sweetness. "So, Willow," he began, handing her a cup, "tell me a bit about yourself." Your letter was brief. She took a sip of tea, her eyes closing for a moment in appreciation. "I grew up on a farm outside of Oakhaven. I've always enjoyed cooking, especially baking. My grandmother taught me everything I know. She knew your Martha back when they were girls." Silas's hand trembled slightly, sloshing tea onto the saucer. "They did? I didn't know that." "Yes. She always spoke so fondly of her. Said she had a heart of gold. That's partly why I answered your advertisement, Mr. Blackwood. I wanted it to honor her memory." A lump formed in Silas's throat. He hadn't expected this connection, this unexpected bridge to his past. "That's very kind of you, Willow. Very kind indeed. Tell me, do you have experience cooking for someone like me? Someone who appreciates traditional meals?" "Oh, yes," she replied eagerly. "My grandmother always cooked the old recipes. Hot roasts, apple pies, chicken casseroles. I know them all by heart." Silas felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that he wouldn't have to suffer through tasteless meals, and guilt that he was already replacing Martha in some small way. "Well," he said, rising to his feet, "I think we should give it a try. I'll show you the kitchen and your room. It's upstairs, overlooking the garden." He led her through the house, pointing out the pantry, the dining room, the small library filled with Martha's favorite books. Willow listened attentively, her eyes wide with interest. The kitchen was large and well-equipped, with a cast-iron stove that Martha had cherished. "This was Martha's domain," Silas said, his voice softening. "She loved to cook. I hope you'll find it to your liking." Willow ran her hand over the cool surface of the stove. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "I'll take good care of it." Upstairs, the room he had prepared for her was small but cozy, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and a view of the snow-dusted garden. "I hope it's comfortable enough," Silas said, feeling a pang of awkwardness. "It's perfect, Mr. Blackwood. Thank you." She turned to him, her green eyes sincere. "I promise I won't disappoint you." He managed a weak smile. "I hope not, Willow. I truly do." He left her to unpack, feeling a strange sense of lightness he hadn't experienced in months. The house no longer felt quite so empty, the silence not quite so deafening. But as he descended the stairs, the guilt returned, a heavy weight in his chest. He had hired her for the winter, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiring her to fill a void that could never truly be filled. A taste of the past. The kitchen, usually a mausoleum of silence and dust motes since Martha's passing, now pulsed with a vibrant energy. The scent of brown beef, onions softening in butter, and herbs simmering in broth filled the air, chasing away the lingering ghost of lemon polish. Martha's favorite. Silas, drawn by the unfamiliar aroma, stood hesitantly in the doorway, a silent observer. Willow, oblivious to his presence, hummed a tuneless melody as she stirred a large pot on the stove. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing freckled forearms dusted with flour. She moved with a quiet confidence, a stark contrast to the shy demeanor she displayed earlier. The firelight danced in her hair, painting it with hues of copper and gold. He cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the stillness of the house. Willow startled, turning quickly, a wooden spoon clutched in her hand like a weapon. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, I didn't hear you come in," she said, her cheeks flushing. "Just observing," he replied, feeling awkward. "Smells interesting." "It's just a simple beef stew," she said, her voice regaining some of its earlier timidity. "Grandmother's recipe. Martha, your wife, used to love it, apparently." Silas's heart clenched. He hadn't spoken Martha's name aloud in weeks. It felt like a betrayal, even thinking about her. "Yes," he managed to say, his voice rough. "She did." He watched as Willow ladled the stew into a chipped ceramic bowl, the same bowls Martha had used for decades. She placed it carefully on the kitchen table, along with a chunk of crusty bread and a spoon. "Please, Mr. Blackwood, try it," she urged, her eyes hopeful. "Tell me what you think." He sat down heavily, the chair creaking in protest. The steam rising from a bowl carried with it a wave of memories. Sunday dinners, cozy evenings by the fire, Martha's gentle smile. He picked up the spoon, his hand trembling slightly. The first bite was a revelation. The rich, savory broth, the tender chunks of beef, the perfectly cooked vegetables. It was exactly how Martha had made it. The same blend of herbs, the same hint of sweetness from the carrots, the same subtle tang from the tomatoes. It was as if Martha herself was standing beside him, guiding Willow's hand. A lump formed in his throat. He swallowed hard, tried to contain the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. It was comforting, undeniably so, but it was also unsettling. He looked up at Willow, who was watching him intently, her expression a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. "It's good," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Very good." He took another bite, and another, the memories flooding his senses. He could almost hear Martha's laughter, feel her hand on his arm. The stew tasted of love, of warmth, of a life that was now gone. "It tastes just like Martha's," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. Willow's eyes widened. "Grandmother said she taught her the recipe years ago, when Martha was first married. She said your wife was a quick learner." Silas pushed the bowl away, his appetite suddenly gone. The stew, which had moments before been a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel reminder of his loss. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over in the process. "Thank you, Willow," he said, his voice strained. "It was very kind of you, but I'm not feeling well. I think I'll go to bed." He turned and walked quickly out of the kitchen, leaving Willow standing alone, the half-eaten bowl of stew sitting untouched on the table. He hurried to his study, closing the door behind him and leaning against it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The house felt smaller now, the silence more oppressive. He stared at the portrait of Martha hanging above the fireplace, her eyes seeming to follow him. He sank into his armchair, burying his face in his hands. He didn't know what to think. Was this a blessing, a way to reconnect with the past? Or was it a curse, a constant reminder of what he had lost? He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that something was not quite right. He had hired Willow to cook for him, to ease his loneliness. But he hadn't expected her to bring Martha back to life, one spoonful at a time. He glanced at the empty whiskey bottle on the desk. Perhaps he needed something to numb the sharp edges of memory. Familiar flavors. The scent of baking apples swirled through the house, a comforting aroma that tugged at Silas's heartstrings. It was apple pie day. Martha's apple pie day. He found Willow humming softly in the kitchen, her cheeks flushed with heat as she pulled the golden brown pie from the oven. The lattice crust was perfect, each square precisely cut, just like Martha used to make. He watched her, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Looks delicious, Willow." She glanced up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Blackwood, I didn't hear you come in. I hope you like it." Like it? He adored it. Martha's apple pie was legendary amongst their friends. He took a slice, the warm, cinnamon-spiced apples melting in his mouth. Each bite was a journey back to simpler times, to Sunday afternoons filled with laughter and love. Martha always used a touch of nutmeg. He murmured, more to himself than to Willow. Said it brought out the sweetness of the apples. Willow's hands stilled as she wiped down the counter. "Did she?" she asked quietly, her back to him. The next day it was chicken pot pie. Flaky, buttery crust giving way to a creamy filling of tender chicken and vegetables. Silas remembered Martha painstakingly crimping the edges of the crust, humming a cheerful tune. He found himself telling Willow about Martha's trick of adding a dash of sherry to the filling. Again, Willow listened silently, her gaze fixed on her task. Then came the cornbread. Not the dry, crumbly kind, but the moist, slightly sweet kind that Martha always served with chili on cold winter nights. Silas could almost hear her voice, teasing him about how much he loved it. He remembered the warmth of her hand in his as they sat by the fire, the soft glow illuminating her face. Each meal was a carefully curated memory, a chapter from his life with Martha laid out on the dinner table. It was unnerving, this constant replay of the past. He found himself retreating further into himself, spending hours in his study, poring over old photographs. He decided he needed to know more about Willow, about where she had learned to cook like this. One evening, as they sat at the table, the remnants of Martha's famous potato leek soup steaming gently in their bowls, he broached the subject. "Willow," he began, his voice hesitant. "Your cooking, it's remarkable. What did you learn?" She looked up, her eyes wide and a little guarded. "Oh, here and there. From family." "Family?" he pressed gently. "Did you train at a culinary school?" She fidgeted with her spoon. "No, nothing like that. Just learn from my grandmother, mostly." "Your grandmother," Silas repeated, his brow furrowed. "Did you say she was a cook?" Willow hesitated, her gaze flickering away from his. "She liked to cook. For the family." Silas leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "What sort of things did she cook? Did she ever make apple pie, perhaps? Or chicken pot pie?" A shadow crossed Willow's face. "She cooked all sorts of things," she said vaguely. "Old family recipes." "And where did your grandmother live?" Silas asked, pressing further. Willow stood abruptly, gathering the dishes. "I really should get these washed," she said, her voice tight. "It's getting late." Silas watched her go, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. Her evasiveness only deepened the mystery. It wasn't just the recipes. It was the subtle nuances, the little details that only someone who had known Martha intimately would know. Was it possible? Could there be some connection between Willow and Martha that he wasn't aware of? He pushed the thought away. It was absurd. Martha was gone. But the food was undeniably, inescapably hers. Dreams of Martha. Sleep offered no escape. Instead, it delivered Martha. Not the fading photograph Martha, forever frozen in her last year, but vibrant, laughing Martha, her hands dusted with flour, her apron smeared with plum jam. He dreamt he stood just inside the kitchen doorway, the familiar scent of cinnamon and baking bread thick in the air. Martha hummed a tune he hadn't heard in years, something from their courting days. Her back was to him, but he knew every curve of her, the way her hair always threatened to escape its bun, the slight sway of her hips as she moved. Then, a second set of hands appeared, smaller and more delicate, mirroring Martha's movements. He watched, transfixed, as Martha guided these hands, shaping dough, adding a pinch of this, a dash of that. The hands belonged to Willow. "No, not so much pressure there, dear." Martha's voice, warm and melodic, filled the dream kitchen. Gentle now, like you're coaxing a secret from it. Willow, in the dream, nodded, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked younger, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her awake. Silas tried to speak, to call out to Martha, but his voice caught in his throat. He was a ghost in his own dream, a silent observer of scene he couldn't comprehend. Martha turned, her eyes meeting his. A smile, achingly familiar, bloomed on her face. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a sadness there, a plea he couldn't decipher. "She needs your help, Silas," Martha whispered, her voice fading like the echo of a distant song. "Don't let her be alone." He lurched awake, his heart hammering against his ribs, the scent of cinnamon clinging to the air around him. The bedside clock glowed with a malevolent red eye. 3:17 a.m. He sat up, pushing the damp hair from his forehead, trying to separate the dream from reality. The kitchen was dark and silent. Or was it? He strained his ears, listening for the faintest sound. A floorboard creaked downstairs. He slipped out of bed, pulling on his dressing gown, the dream clinging to him like a shroud. He crept down the stairs, his bare feet silent on the wooden treads. As he neared the kitchen, a sliver of light spilled out from under the door. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the cool metal of the doorknob. He pushed the door open a crack. Willow stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in a pot. The same apron Martha used to wear was tied around her waist, though it hung a bit loose on her smaller frame. The kitchen was bathed in the soft glow of the stovetop light, illuminating the wisps of hair that had escaped her braid. He watched her for a long moment, his mind reeling. Was this part of the dream, too? Or was Willow truly possessed by some echo of Martha's spirit? She hummed softly, the same tune he had heard in his dream. Silas pushed the door open further. Willow startled, turning around quickly, a wooden spoon clattering to the floor. "Silas, I'm so sorry. Did I wake you?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Willow bent to pick up the spoon. "Just couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make some broth. The house felt a bit chilly." He studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, any trace of the Martha from his dream. But all he saw was Willow, tired and a little flustered. "Broth?" he repeated, his voice softening. "Yes, chicken broth. Martha, your wife, she used to say it was good for what ails you." The way she said Martha's name, almost reverently, sent a shiver down his spine. "Did she?" he asked, stepping into the kitchen. Willow turned back to the stove, stirring the broth. "I found a recipe for it in her old cookbook. It smelled like she was here." He watched her, trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the figure in his dream. Could she truly be channeling Martha, or was his grief simply playing tricks on his mind? "Why this recipe, Willow?" She paused, chewing on her lip. "It felt right, like it was calling to me." The cookbook discovery. The aroma of baking bread, a scent that used to soothe him, now prickled Silas's skin. He couldn't shake the image from his dream, Martha's spectral hand guiding Willow's. And then, this morning, seeing Willow practically embody that vision. It was too much. He needed answers, and Willow wasn't offering them freely. He waited until he heard Willow humming softly in the garden, tending to what he assumed were herbs. Then, his heart hammering against his ribs, he crossed the hall to her room. It was small, plainly furnished, but filled with light. A stark contrast to the heavy, shadowed rooms he usually occupied. A woven rug lay on the floor, its colors muted but warm. On the small bedside table sat a stack of well-worn paperbacks and a sprig of lavender in a simple glass. He felt a pang of guilt invading her privacy, but the unease gnawing at him was far stronger. He started with the dresser. Neatly folded clothes, mostly practical and unfussy. Nothing out of the ordinary. He moved to the small writing desk tucked into the corner. A few letters stationary, a couple of pencils sharpened to perfect points. He opened a single drawer, empty save for a worn, cloth-covered book. His breath hitched. It was old, the fabric faded and frayed at the edges. He recognized it instantly. Martha's cookbook. He hadn't seen it in years, hadn't had the heart to look. He lifted it carefully, his fingers tracing the faded floral pattern. The cloth felt soft, familiar against his skin. He opened it. Martha's handwriting, looping and elegant, filled the pages. Recipes for everything from simple biscuits to elaborate Christmas puddings. And tucked in between the pages, scraps of paper with Willow's own handwriting, smaller, neater, but undeniably her own. Notes scribbled in the margins, questions, modifications. Add a pinch of nutmeg. Less sugar. Martha always said. The blood drained from Silas's face. He slammed the book shut, the sound echoing in the small room. He had to get out, had to confront her. He found Willow kneeling amongst the rows of herbs, her brow furrowed in concentration as she snipped off a sprig of rosemary. Willow! His voice was sharper than he intended. She startled, dropping her shears. She looked up at him, her eyes wide and questioning. Silas? Is everything all right? He held up the cookbook. Where did you get this? Her cheeks flushed a delicate pink. I found it. In the attic. The attic? I haven't been up there in years. His voice was low, dangerous. And why didn't you tell me? She stood, brushing dirt from her hands. I didn't know how. It seemed personal, and I was hoping to surprise you. To make something special. Special? You're cooking my wife's recipes, using her cookbook, and you think that's special? He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. How did you know about the recipes, about the little details, the things only Martha knew? Willow's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. It's just, when I cook them, it feels right. Like I'm remembering something. Remembering? You never met Martha. I know, but... She hesitated, her voice barely a whisper. It's like she's guiding me. Silas scoffed. Guiding you? That's absurd. But even as he said the words, the image of his dream flashed through his mind. Martha's translucent hand over Willow's. I know it sounds crazy, Willow said, her voice trembling. But it's true. In the cookbook, it helps. It's like she's talking to me through the pages. He stared at her, his anger slowly giving way to confusion, to a bone-deep weariness. He wanted to believe her, wanted to find some comfort in the possibility that Martha was somehow still present. But the rational part of him, the part that had spent years burying his grief under layers of logic and reason, couldn't accept it. I want you to pack your things, he said, his voice flat. Willow gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. What? But why? I can't do this, he said, turning away. It's too much, too painful. I need you to leave. He couldn't bear to look at her, at the pain he knew he was inflicting. He felt like he was betraying Martha all over again. A family connection. The silence that followed Willow's declaration stretched, thick and suffocating, between them. Silas stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief slowly crumbling. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the familiar gesture doing little to calm the storm raging within him. Guided by Martha's spirit, he finally choked out, the words laced with incredulity. Willow's shoulders slumped. It sounds crazy, I know, but it's true. Or at least, it feels true. The first time I opened that cookbook, it was like she was right there, guiding my hand. She gestured towards the worn leather-bound volume, still clutched in her trembling hands. It is hers, isn't it? Silas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Willow nodded, her eyes glistening. Yes, it was left to me, in her will. Silas blinked, his mind struggling to process this new information. Martha had a will, and she'd left something to Willow. He knew nothing about this. Who are you, Willow? He asked, the question laced with a desperate plea for clarity. Willow took a deep breath. I'm Willow Greenleaf. Martha was my aunt, my mother's sister. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken history. Silas felt a jolt, a physical sensation, as if a circuit had been completed in his mind. It explained so much. The uncanny accuracy of the dishes, the faint resemblance in her eyes. Martha had a sister? Silas asked, his voice raspy. He remembered Martha mentioning a falling out with her family years ago, but the details had faded with time. Yes, my mother, Eleanor. They weren't close. There was a disagreement years ago. They lost touch. Willow's voice was soft, laced with a sadness that mirrored his own. My mother passed away when I was very young. I grew up in an orphanage. I never knew my family. She clutched the cookbook tighter. When I turned 18, the lawyers contacted me. They told me about Martha, about the will. She left me this, hoping it would help me connect with her family. With her. Willow's story unfolded, a tapestry of loss and longing, echoing the grief that had consumed Silas for so long. He pictured a young, orphan girl, clutching Martha's cookbook, searching for a connection to a family she'd never known. He saw the echo of Martha in her face, a softer version, a hint of the woman he had loved and lost. I didn't know, Silas stammered, the words catching in his throat. Shame washed over him, a bitter tide. He had been so consumed by his own grief, so blinded by his pain, that he hadn't seen the truth that was right in front of him. He'd accused her, demanded she leave, all because he was afraid of what? Of feeling something again? I understand, Willow said quietly, her gaze unwavering. It's a lot to take in. Silas stepped closer to her, reaching out a hand, then hesitating. This cookbook, it was important to her, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Willow nodded. She wrote notes in the margins, little stories about each recipe, about who she made it for, what the occasion was. It's like she's still here, shared her life with me. Silas thought of Martha in her kitchen, humming a tune as she kneaded dough, her face flushed with warmth and love. He remembered the aromas that filled the house, the comforting rituals that had defined their life together. And he realized, with a sudden, piercing clarity, that Willow wasn't trying to replace Martha. She was trying to connect with her, to honor her memory, to keep her alive in a way that he, in his grief, had been too afraid to do. Stay, Willow, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Please, stay. Let's learn about her together. Let's cook her recipes, read her stories, and maybe, just maybe, we can both find a little bit of Martha again. Willow looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She reached out and gently took his hand. Okay, Silas, she said, her voice trembling. Okay, a shared table. The following days unfolded with a quiet, almost sacred rhythm. The heavy silence that had suffocated the Blackwood house began to lift, replaced by the gentle hum of shared stories and the clatter of pans. Silas found himself drawn into conversations about Martha he never thought he'd have again, his voice catching at first, then flowing more freely as Willow recounted anecdotes from the cookbook and her own mother's memories. She always said her apple pie crust was a secret, Silas chuckled, remembering Martha's playful boast. Tried for years to get it out of her. Willow smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Mom said the secret was cold butter and a light touch, and a pinch of cardamom, apparently. Martha never wrote that down. They started experimenting. Silas, emboldened by Willow's presence, suggested adding a layer of thinly sliced pears beneath the apples. Willow, in turn, incorporated a crumble topping inspired by a recipe her grandmother used to make. The result was a pie that was both familiar and entirely new, a testament to Martha's legacy and their own burgeoning connection. Cooking became a collaborative dance. Silas, surprisingly spry, chopped vegetables with a newfound enthusiasm, while Willow, guided by his subtle suggestions, adjusted the seasoning of a stew or perfected the consistency of a sauce. They discovered shared preferences, a love for fresh herbs, a disdain for overly sweet desserts, and gentle disagreements that always ended in laughter. One afternoon, they were preparing Martha's famous Sunday roast. Silas was meticulously basting the chicken with pan juices, while Willow was mashing potatoes, adding a dollop of creme fraiche and a sprinkle of chives. A touch Martha would have undoubtedly approved of. She used to hum while she cooked, Silas said softly, a wistful smile playing on his lips. Some old tune from the war, I think. Willow started humming. It was a simple melody, a little off-key, but undeniably comforting. Silas closed his eyes, the sound transporting him back to his younger days, to a kitchen filled with the aroma of roasting chicken and the warmth of Martha's presence. As the weeks passed, The snow began to melt, and the first tentative signs of spring appeared. Crocuses poked their heads through the frozen earth, and a robin chirped its cheerful song outside the kitchen window. The Blackwood house, once a sanctuary of grief, was slowly awakening. One evening, after they had finished dinner, a hearty lentil soup adapted from a recipe Martha had clipped from a magazine decades ago, Silas cleared his throat. He'd been turning it over in his mind for days, weeks even. "Willow," he began, his voice a little shaky. "The winter is almost over." Willow nodded, her gaze fixed on her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. I know our arrangement was only for the season," Silas continued, "but I was wondering—" He paused, gathering his courage. "I was wondering if you would consider staying." Willow's head shot up, her eyes wide with surprise. Silas rushed on. "Not as a cook, though. I don't want to hire you. I want you to stay as family. As my family." He saw the question in her eyes, the hesitant hope. "Martha would have wanted this," he added softly. "She always talked about wanting a family. And you're her kin, Willow. You're connected to her in a way no one else is." He stood and walked over to the window, looking out at the garden where new life was budding. "This house, it's been so empty for so long. You filled it with light, with laughter, with the smell of good cooking, yes, but also with something more. With life." He turned back to her, his eyes pleading. "Please, Willow, stay. Let's keep Martha's memory alive together. Let's be a family." Willow's eyes welled up with tears. She rose and walked towards Silas. I would like that very much, Mr. Blackwood." Silas smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. "Silas," he corrected gently. "Please call me Silas. And welcome home, Willow."